but I'm taking scuba diving lessons.
Scuba diving.
And
All right.
Sunday is when I take my lesson, believe it or not. So unfortunately, I won't be able to come. But thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much.
Jody, thank you for joining us this morning. Good deal. The Baltimore City State's Attorney, Mr. Gregg Bernstein. How are you, sir?
I'm well, Donnie, and it's a real pleasure to be on your show. I know that you followed my campaign, of course, in
We
your.
were hard on you, man.
It's all right. That there's no worries there. I mean, that's what politics is about, and what it does is it keeps you sharp, and you need to respond to the questions that come. So it's great to be on here and have a dialogue with you.
How's it been going?
It's been going really well. It's been going really, really well. We've done already in 9 months a number of amazing new changes in the operation of the office. We're focusing for the first time on training to try to make the prosecutors more effective in the courtroom. We're doing all kinds of things from a technological standpoint in terms of giving the assistant state's attorneys the technological skills and tools they need to be more effective. We're changing the organization of the office. We're moving to a community prosecution base where we're taking our prosecutors and dividing them up and putting them in zones. We're dividing the city into zones, putting groups of prosecutors there so that they can be more engaged and connected to the communities where the crime is occurring. We've created a major investigations unit that's focusing on the repeat violent offenders because, as you know, that's one of my main focuses. We've got a civilian review unit we started at the district court level. We have over 50,000 cases a year filed in the district court, and a number of them are citizen-initiated complaints rather than police arrests. So what this new civilian review unit is doing is when the citizen goes in, files the criminal charges, the commissioner will issue the summons, will issue the warrant, as the case may be, but then direct the person to meet with one of my assistant state's attorneys within 48 hours. That gets us much more involved in the case at an early stage, and we can kind of weed out the ones that maybe don't belong in criminal court, maybe the ones that mentoring would be better, or some kind of mediation, that kind of thing. We've got all kinds of diversion courts set up, so things are going very well.
Heroin, coke, dope. They flood our streets. Every day I see the addicts in my community. And having had personal experience in that, I know there are a lot of people who want to get out of that rut, who want to change, who want a new lifestyle. What impact has the street drugs, and now they tell me the young ones, the teenagers and in their young 20s, they're popping Percocets, uh, chewing them like Skittles. The impact of street drugs on the criminal justice system.
Well, look, Donnie, I mean, that's of course a question that you and I could talk about for hours. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think we can incarcerate our way out of the drug problem in this country. I mean, it was tried a number of years ago, and it just was not successful, and that's why the United States has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world.
Because of drugs,
Yes, sir.
crack cocaine in particular.
Well, all
Oh.
drugs, because of the sentences that were imposed for people that are really just drug addicts, where they're not using violence to, continue their trade or to buy drugs. And this, Donnie, has been the focus of a very well-written book by a woman named Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. And I'm not sure you're
Oh
familiar
yeah,
with.
she talks about incarceration.
She does. Well, what she talks about is how, in many ways, the incarceration of mostly African Americans in the last 20, 30 years for drug-related, nonviolent offenses, in many ways, is just the new Jim Crow. That it's a way to systematically discriminate against the African American population in ways that the old Jim Crow used to do, but you can't do now, is her thesis, because it would not be acceptable to say it. But when you think about it, you look at the impact on people who have a criminal record and what it does to them. It limits their job opportunities, it limits their education opportunities, it limits their ability to vote, to get driving records.
To be a part of the family.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, absolutely. And so you have to ask the question, if that's the impact you know, what are we doing wrong? Because we've got to stop this kind of cycle. Now, I will say to you candidly that I don't accept her premise, Miss Alexander's premise, but it's a terrific book. My friend Billy Murphy is the one who made me read it right after I got elected, and I did. And I found what she wrote to be, you know, very interesting, very thought-provoking. Again, I don't necessarily agree with the premise, but I do agree with the idea that we need to figure out ways to deal with people that have drug addictions, drug problems, in ways that they don't keep cycling through the system. Now, I'm talking about individuals who don't have violence in their history, who are not using violence to commit the crime. I'm just talking about people hanging on the corner, you know, that are either using drugs or maybe even selling drugs. That's why we're pushing our diversion courts, our drug courts. We've got to figure out ways, you know, to get those people the treatment that they need. It can't just come from the state's attorney's office. I mean, I got to be very blunt about this. I mean, my job as state's attorney is to prosecute people who commit crimes. It's got to come from the communities. It's got to come from the faith-based community. It's got to come from the nonprofit sector. It's got to come from the private sector. You've got to have those people providing the opportunities for these people.
Has who from those groups uh, who has demonstrated leadership thus far? Who would be a prime example that you would have other leaders in the community follow?
Well, Donnie, here's some of the things at least that I've seen, and I will again be very candid with you. It's only been 9 months, so I'm still learning. Okay, but at least in my experience, some of the things I've seen is there's a woman named Sarah Heminger who has a program called Incentive Mentoring, and it's like mentoring on steroids. And what she does is she has a relationship with Dunbar High School. She takes kids that have the worst truancy rate, who are just not going to school, and she's got tons of volunteers, mostly from Hopkins students, who as a group mentor these kids, get them through school, get them into colleges. Her success rate is phenomenal. So that's the kind of program that I'm talking about that can provide opportunities for these, because it really, I know you know this, it starts with the youth. That's where we've got to begin.
It's supposed to start at home, but unfortunately, in many of our households in the black community, you have multi-generational teen parents.
And that is a problem.
Nobody ever grew up.
And the fact of the matter is, schools cannot raise children. It's
No.
just, that's just the way it is. And I think that, you know, Mr. Alonso is doing a really good job. I think the educational system in Baltimore City is improving, but folks can't just say, "Oh, I'm sending my kid to school."
It starts at home.
It starts at home. I couldn't agree more.
44% of America's prison population is black men. That bothers me. I get worried when I see Rockefeller laws. I get worried when I learn that America has the highest rate of incarceration of any nation. I get worried particularly when Bill Clinton, a Democrat, helped lead the way in terms of incarceration.
Well, you've been reading Michelle Williams' book, Mr. Glover, because
Just been reading the facts.
You should worry. I mean, it is an issue. The fact of the matter is that African Americans are the ones who suffer the most from this so-called war on drugs and the incarceration rate in this country. I mean, you can't argue with the facts. And so what you have to say is two things. Number one, how do we stop the cycle? So how do we stop the person who is in prison for some low-level drug offense or even a low-level drug distribution offense and is coming out of jail? How do we design and create programs for that individual so that he or she does not reoffend? I mean, I think that one of the little dark secrets in our society is that reentry programs are almost non-existent. They're starting to spring up, and that's where I think the private sector and nonprofits and the like can really do. The Able Foundation does a lot of work with this, so does the Rose Center, those kinds of organizations, that they understand that we have to stop the cycle. The way we stop it is by giving these people opportunities. The second thing we have to do is we have to think of alternatives to incarceration for individuals, again, who are arrested and charged with these low-level drug-related offenses who clearly have an addiction. And that's where I can come in terms of using our diversion programs, our drug court, trying to come up with alternatives to incarceration.
We had a ministry, and we'd like to get it restarted. It was Love for L, where we went to visit 14 to 17-year-olds over on L section in the city jail. And, you know, when one of those young men would come up to me on the streets after being released, they would always say thank you, and they were always grateful. but also saw a hunger in them that they wanted more, that maybe someone hadn't taken the time, to show them a better way. They say if you know better, you would do better. So here's a question. What responsibility do I have? Do the men in the community have? Do the black men in the community have as it relates to helping these young men and young women, increasingly young women, find their way to the path?
Well, I mean, Donnie, that's the easiest question you'll ask me, of course, because you do have a responsibility. And, you see it in some instances. There's this, what I found to be a very interesting program out of Washington called the National Homeowners Academy and Homecoming Academy, excuse me, Homecomers Academy. And what they're trying to do is exactly the kind of things that you're talking about, that they're trying to set up programs. It's run by a guy named Chris Watkins in Washington, D.C. And what they're trying to do is provide that lifeline, so to speak, that contact with the person who comes out of jail, who says, we're here for you, we can help you. Here's another thing that they're doing, which I found really interesting. This is how I learned about the organization, is that there's a number of men in the organization who are walking children to school and walking them home at the end of the day. So they kind of go as a group. And,
It's basic stuff, but
yeah,
that's what works.
when I read that, I thought, what a cool thing. I mean, what a great thing to try to do here in Baltimore, because that's how you start to get the communities more engaged and people start to take more responsibility for these kinds of things.
Why is Baltimore so violent, from your estimation? I mean, you've seen it on both sides. A police officer, as a matter of fact, it was the mayor's driver. He took a minute and shared with me that the younger people today are off the hook in a way that we were not. I'm 46. I imagine you're around 46 or so. You look younger than
I'll
me.
take that as a compliment.
But the officer said that the young people today, and he didn't go. We didn't talk long, but I can certainly look at gangs. There's gang activity in every jurisdiction in Maryland. Uh, they're crack babies like never before. They're lead poison children like never before. They're teenage parents like never before. There's poverty to a level of 1929, the Great Depression. Why do you think Baltimore is so violent?
Well, Donnie, again, a complicated question. I think it's a couple things. I think location. Let me back up. I certainly think that the drug problem is a big, huge component of this. And I think that Baltimore is geographically located as kind of a dropping off point, or as between the southern states and the northern states. So you've got that issue. I think the crack epidemic years ago hit Baltimore really hard. And so, and we were talking about this just before the show started, that kind of drug activity breeds a lot of the violence. So I think that's part of the reason. And I think it's a lot about lost opportunity and lost hope.
So what's the shot of hope?
I think
That's a great way to end at least my segment. We'll pass the ball, let you close out however you like. But you told me not to be hopeless. And I say I look around these streets, man, and people are tired. People are weary. You talk about poor voter turnout in this last election. One, people were confused because there were so many candidates, but there's an apathy. There's a lack of belief in the system. I mean, in the black community, people love Barack Obama, even though he has his critics in the black community. But people are weary. They're wondering just what difference will this politician make?
well, I always say that it's important to stay in your lanes, and by that I mean, Donnie, I'm a prosecutor. My job is to prosecute, so I don't. I'm kind of moving into an area that's not my lane, so to speak. But I do think that there is hope, and you and I had an exchange about that, and you in particular cannot lose hope, because you, Donnie Glover, are in many ways the voice, one voice in the African American community. And if someone like you is going to lose hope, then the people in the African American community are going to follow behind. So it's important, I think, for people like you, kind of boots on the ground, the people that are in the streets, to keep trying to get people engaged. And I think it has to start at a really local level in terms of the things that you and I have been talking about for the last 20 minutes. Walking kids to school, trying to be better parents, trying to be more engaged. And then I'll do my part in terms of trying to give these people the opportunities to allow them to break this cycle of addiction. And that's how we do it.